I'm standing in my own home, and my wife is doing everything in her power to mask her panic and convince me I'm crazy. But I'm already on the edge. My finger is steady on the trigger, and at any moment, I'm ready to pull it. It's aimed at the closet in our bedroom. The room feels too small, the air thick with tension. Emily's voice wavers, though she's trying to sound composed. Her words are sharp, tinged with that commanding tone she always uses when she wants to take control of a situation. She tells me to put the gun down, that I'm being paranoid. Her hands gesture wildly as she pleads, but her eyes betray her. They keep darting toward the closet door. Behind the thin barrier of wood, I can hear it, the faint, irregular sound of breathing. My muscles tighten, every nerve in my body screaming for action. "You're going to regret this," Emily says, her voice finally breaking. Regret. The word hangs in the air like smoke. I already regret everything. She's not like anyone else I've ever met. Emily's beauty doesn't rest in soft smiles or gentle gestures. It's in the fire behind her eyes, the sharpness of her mind, and the way she commands attention without ever needing to raise her voice. She's the type of woman who could dismantle a room with a single look if something didn't please her. From the moment I met her, I knew she was different. I'd been used to women who sought stability, predictability, qualities they thought my military career embodied. But Emily didn't care about stability. She wanted challenges, excitement, control. She wasn't looking for someone to protect her. She was looking for someone strong enough to stand beside her. I fell for her because she was my equal. Sharp, cunning, and fearless. She had this uncanny ability to assess people and situations within moments, knowing exactly where their weaknesses lay. Sometimes that made her terrifying. But God, it also made her intoxicating. One of our first dates was at a shooting range. It wasn't my suggestion, it was hers. Most people would have been intimidated by the idea of competing against a former soldier, but not Emily. She walked in with calm composure, surveyed the setup, and confidently chose her weapon. When she hit bullseye after bullseye, she didn't even gloat. She just glanced at me with a smirk that said, "What else did you expect?" That's what excited me about her. She wasn't someone who needed to be rescued or reassured. She was a warrior in every sense of the word. And she didn't just have my respect. She had my admiration. Even now, as I stand here with my gun aimed at the closet, I can see that fire in her eyes. It's dimmed by panic, yes, but it's still there. That same fire I once fell in love with is the reason I can't fully believe what's happening. Emily was never supposed to be the kind of person who betrayed someone. The shooting range was where Emily truly shone. Her poise with a weapon was something to behold. Steady hands, sharp eyes, and a confidence that never faltered. She treated every target like it was a battle to be won, her shots landing with precision that rivaled my own. She wasn't just skilled. She was composed, calculating. The noise, the stakes, the competition, none of it shook her. When she turned to me after hitting another bullseye, that smirk on her face said it all. What else did you expect? That's what drew me to her. Emily wasn't soft or fragile. She was a warrior, someone who thrived under pressure and met every challenge head-on. Her fire was magnetic, her strength intoxicating. It's that strength I keep remembering now, even as I stand here. She was supposed to be unshakable, but now her fire looks like fear. If there was one crack in our foundation, it was the question of children. Emily had made her stance clear from the start. She didn't want them. She believed children were anchors, weighing down the life she wanted to live. At the time, I thought I agreed. Our freedom, our adventures, our shared intensity felt like enough. But over the years, something shifted in me. I started picturing a different future. Small feet running down the hall, a home filled with laughter. It wasn't a sudden longing, but a slow, quiet ache that grew with time. I never told her. I knew what that conversation would lead to, and I didn't want to risk breaking us apart. So I buried the yearning, convincing myself it wasn't worth losing her. But it lingered, an unspoken tension between us, something we both felt but never acknowledged. Our marriage was stable, steady in its own unpredictable way. Emily and I weren't the kind of couple who smothered each other in affection or traded endless sweet nothings. We thrived on challenges, pushing and supporting each other like sparring partners who never truly wanted the fight to end. Emily could be cold at times, retreating behind her walls when she was upset. It was maddening, but it never lasted. She always came back, fierce and loyal, with the determination to make things right. That's just who she was. Fire and steel, never half measures. She wasn't someone who showed affection easily, but when she did, it came like a firestorm, sweeping me up in her intensity. Those moments when her guard was down were everything. They made the cold silences worth enduring. We weren't perfect, but we were ours. At least I thought we were. It was a 3-day trip to New York, a security consultancy gig for a high-profile client. I'd been doing these on the side since leaving the military. The work was straightforward enough. Assess vulnerabilities, offer solutions, write up a report. It wasn't exactly thrilling, but it kept my skills sharp and paid well. Emily had barely reacted when I told her about it a week prior. "It'll just be a few days," I'd said, watching her as she scrolled through her phone. She'd looked up briefly, nodded, and told me to be safe. That was Emily, unflappable. She never seemed bothered by my time away. The morning I left, she stood in the doorway as I grabbed my bag. Her arms were crossed loosely, her expression unreadable. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, her lips cool, her gaze steady. "See you in a few days," she said. There was no trace of anything unusual, no tension, no hesitation. If anything, she seemed more at ease than usual. I didn't dwell on it. Our goodbyes were rarely dramatic. We weren't the kind of couple who clung to each other at the door. Emily had always valued her independence, and I'd always respected that about her. The trip itself was uneventful. Meetings, presentations, handshakes with a few corporate suits who didn't know the first thing about real security but liked to feel important. By the second day, I was counting the hours until I could head home. I missed the quiet rhythm of our house, the familiarity of Emily's presence. Even if we often spent time in separate rooms, caught up in our own routines. I called her once on the second evening. She answered quickly, her tone light and casual. "Everything's fine here," she'd said. "Don't worry about a thing." And I didn't. For me, it was just another trip, another notch in the belt of our life together, separate at times, but solid, trustworthy. That's how I saw it, anyway. When I pulled out of the driveway that morning, I didn't look back. Why would I? I came back a day earlier than planned. The client had wrapped things up ahead of schedule, and I figured Emily would appreciate the surprise. The drive home felt familiar and calming. Mile after mile of open road, my mind already drifting to the quiet comfort of our house. But as soon as I walked through the door, something felt off. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Faint, barely there, but noticeable enough. A trace of cologne that wasn't mine, sharp and unfamiliar. It mingled with the scent of her usual lavender diffuser, but it didn't belong. Emily was in the kitchen when I stepped inside, her back to me as she rinsed a glass under the tap. At the sound of the door closing, she turned sharply, her expression frozen for just a fraction of a second before she broke into a smile. "You're back early," she said, her tone light, almost too light. I set my bag down, watching her. "Client wrapped up sooner than expected," I said, studying her face. She looked the same as always, composed, poised, but there was something else. A tightness around her eyes, a stiffness in the way she moved. My eyes flicked to the counter behind her, where a second wineglass sat next to the sink. The rim was faintly smudged, the kind of detail most people wouldn't notice. But I wasn't most people. "Everything okay here?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Of course," she replied too quickly. She moved past me to the living room, gesturing toward the couch. "You must be tired. Sit down. I'll get you some coffee." I followed her but didn't sit. My gaze swept the room, cataloging every detail. The throw pillows were slightly out of place. The air felt too still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. In the bedroom, it was the bed that gave me pause. The linens were off, subtly but off. Emily always made the bed with military precision, a habit I'd grown to love about her. But this time, the edges were uneven, the pillows askew, as if they'd been hastily rearranged. Each detail by itself could have been nothing, but together, they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. My instincts, honed by years of training, screamed at me that something was wrong. I returned to the kitchen, where Emily was leaning against the counter, her arms crossed. She met my gaze, her expression steady, almost defiant. I wanted to ask her about the wineglass, the bed, the faint trace of cologne, but I didn't. Not yet. I just stood there, the weight of suspicion pressing down on me. "I'm glad you're home," she said, her voice steady but too practiced. I nodded, but inside, I could feel the walls of trust beginning to crack. The pieces started falling into place the moment I stepped out of the bedroom. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things, looking for problems where there weren't any. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling, that whisper in the back of my mind telling me to keep looking. The jacket on the arm of the couch was the first clue. It wasn't mine, and it didn't belong to Emily either. She'd never wear something so bulky, and the cut was distinctly masculine. I ran my fingers over it, finding a single strand of blonde hair caught in the fabric. Long and fine. Emily's hair was dark. I moved to the bathroom, trying to quiet the racing in my chest. On the towel rack, there was a freshly washed towel folded the wrong way. Emily was meticulous about these things, hospital corners, perfectly symmetrical folds. But this towel was haphazard, as if someone unfamiliar with the routine had done it in a hurry. When I came back to the living room, Emily was sitting on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped in her lap. She wasn't fidgeting, which was strange. She wasn't pacing or flipping through her phone like she normally did when she was distracted. Instead, she was sitting perfectly still, her composure too exact, too deliberate. That's when it hit me. She was performing. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a normal evening. Emily was calm, the house tidy, the air quiet, but to me it felt staged, like the set of a play where the actors had cleared out just moments before I arrived. I thought about the faint cologne, the wineglass, the bed linens, the towel, and the jacket. Each detail on its own could be explained away. Together, they painted a picture I didn't want to see. Emily's voice broke the silence, light and casual. "You're awfully quiet. Long trip." I met her gaze, her calm exterior only deepening the unease in my chest. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't rushing to fill the silence like she normally would. She was too composed, and that's when I knew for certain I'd interrupted something. Something she never expected me to see. Emily had always been composed, but now her calm was slipping. It was in the way her eyes darted toward the bedroom, the way she lingered near the doorway like she was guarding something. Her movements were careful, too careful, and the tension radiating off her was palpable. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched her, waiting for a crack to show. It didn't take long. When I moved toward the bedroom, Emily stepped forward instinctively, blocking the doorway. "I just tidied up in there," she said quickly. "Why don't we sit and have some coffee first?" The words were casual, but her tone was tight, stretched thin. I stopped, studying her. Her breathing was shallow, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. It was subtle, but I knew her too well to miss the signs. Something was wrong, and whatever it was in that room. I stepped past her without a word. She didn't try to stop me, but I could feel her gaze boring into the back of my head as I walked into the bedroom. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The bed was made, poorly but made. The curtains were drawn, the floor clear of any clutter. But then I heard it. A faint creak, almost imperceptible, coming from the closet. I froze, every nerve in my body going on high alert. Slowly, I turned toward the door, my pulse quickening. Emily had followed me into the room, her voice suddenly sharp. "Daniel, what are you doing?" Her panic was barely concealed now, her composure unraveling by the second. My mind raced, piecing it all together. The cologne, the jacket, the smudged wineglass, the bed, the towel. And now the closet. It all clicked. My hand went to the nightstand, where my gun was kept. I didn't take my eyes off the closet door as I retrieved it, the weight familiar and grounding in my grip. "Daniel, stop," Emily said, her voice rising. "You're being ridiculous." I ignored her, my focus unshaken. I raised the gun, aiming it squarely at the closet. My finger hovered over the trigger, my breathing steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Open it," I said quietly. Emily didn't move. She just stood there, her face pale, her hands trembling. The woman I had once thought unshakable was now crumbling before me. That's when I knew. "Tell me the truth, Emily." My voice was low, steady, but the weight behind it made her flinch. "There's nothing to tell," she said, her words rushing out in a breathless stream. "You're being paranoid." Her calm facade was gone, replaced by a frantic energy I'd never seen in her before. She took a step toward me, her hands raised like she was trying to soothe a wild animal. "Please, Daniel, put the gun down. You're scaring me." But I didn't lower it. I edged closer to the closet, my focus unyielding. The air felt thick, heavy with the kind of tension that builds seconds before something shatters. "Daniel, stop this," Emily pleaded, her voice cracking. "You're imagining things." Her words barely registered. I was listening for something else, and I heard it. A faint, shallow gasp of air, like someone trying desperately not to breathe. I stared at the closet door, every instinct I had screaming at me to fling it open. My grip on the gun tightened. "Who's in there, Emily?" Her composure broke entirely. She stepped between me and the door, her body trembling. "Please," she begged, tears welling in her eyes. "You don't want to do this. Just let it go. Move. Daniel, I'm begging you." She reached for my arm, her voice rising in desperation. "This isn't what you think. It's nothing. Please, just listen to me." Her panic only confirmed what I already knew. Someone was in there, someone who didn't belong. I took a step forward and Emily fell apart. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she dropped to her knees, her hands clasped together like she was praying. "Don't do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, okay? I'm so sorry." But it was too late. The lies, the excuses, the pleas, they couldn't stop me now. My hand reached for the closet door, and then I heard it again. The breathing, shallow, panicked, trapped. The tension in the room was unbearable, every second stretching into an eternity. My heart was pounding, my finger hovering over the trigger as I prepared for what I was about to uncover. I yanked the closet door open, and the truth hit me like a freight train. There he was, hunched and trembling, his polished appearance utterly undone. He was younger, maybe early 30s, with slicked back hair that now hung limp and sweaty against his forehead. His shirt was wrinkled, buttons half done, his tie hanging loose around his neck like a noose. The fear on his face was primal, his wide eyes darting between the gun in my hand and Emily, who was now sobbing uncontrollably behind me. For a moment, everything went silent. The room, the world, my own thoughts, all drowned in the stillness of disbelief. I felt my chest tighten, the betrayal crashing over me in waves, but underneath it all was something colder, sharper. Rage. I stepped closer, and the man shrank back against the wall, his hands raised defensively. I didn't mean," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Shut up." The words came out low, controlled, but the fury behind them burned in my throat. Emily's cries grew louder, but I didn't turn to her. My focus was on him, the coward cowering in my closet, the man who had dared to cross into my life, into my home. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice like ice. He swallowed hard, struggling to form words. Mark," he choked out. I work with Emily." Mark. Just a name, meaningless and insignificant. But suddenly it was everything I hated. My grip on the gun tightened as my mind raced. Images of the two of them flashed unbidden. Her laughter, his touch, their lies. I could end it right here. One pull of the trigger and all that rage, all that betrayal would have somewhere to go. But years of training held me back. Discipline, control, that's what had kept me alive in war zones, and now it was the only thing keeping me from crossing a line I could never uncross. Emily's voice broke through the haze, trembling and raw. "Daniel, please," she sobbed. "Don't do this." I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her out of the corner of my eye. She was crumpled on the floor, her hands clutching her face as if she couldn't bear to look at what was happening. For the first time, she didn't look strong or cunning. She looked broken, weak, but that didn't matter now. None of it did. I lowered the gun slowly, the barrel still trained on Mark as I took a step back. "Get out," I said, my voice steady but cold. He didn't move, his body frozen in fear. "Get out." He scrambled to his feet, stumbling as he bolted past me and out of the room. The door slammed shut behind him, the echo reverberating through the house like a gunshot. I stood there for a moment, gripping the gun, staring at the empty hallway where he'd fled. The rage still pulsed in my veins, but it was different now. Colder, heavier, settling like lead in my chest. Behind me, Emily collapsed onto the bedroom floor, her sobs cutting through the silence. "Daniel." Her voice was broken, raw with desperation. "Please, let me explain." I turned to face her, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman I'd fallen in love with. Gone was the fierce, unshakable warrior I'd admired. What sat before me now was someone small, fragile, a shell of the person I thought I knew. "There's nothing to explain," I said, my voice flat. She shook her head violently, crawling toward me on her knees. Tears streamed down her face, her hands clasped as if she were begging for her life. "It's not what you think. It didn't mean anything. I was lonely, Daniel. You're always gone." And I held up a hand, and she stopped mid-sentence, her lips trembling. "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't insult me with excuses." Her sobs grew louder, her whole body shaking as she tried to find the words to justify what she'd done. "I love you," she cried, her voice cracking. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. Please, just let me explain." I stared at her, my chest tightening. I wanted to feel something, anger, sorrow, anything, but all I felt was emptiness. How could someone so strong, so calculated, stoop to this? She'd always been the one who seemed unbreakable, the one who faced everything head-on. But now she was nothing but a coward. "You betrayed me," I said finally, my tone even and cold. "Not just me, us, everything we built." She clutched at her chest like the words had physically struck her. "I can fix it," she sobbed. "We can fix it. I'll do anything. Just don't walk away." Fix it? The absurdity of her words almost made me laugh. But there was no humor left in me. This wasn't something you fixed. This wasn't a crack in the foundation. This was the foundation crumbling to dust. I stepped back, lowering the gun completely but keeping it in my hand. "Don't bother, Emily," I said quietly. "You've already burned it to the ground." Her sobs filled the room as I turned and walked out, leaving her on the floor. I didn't look back. The urge to act immediately was almost overwhelming. My training had taught me to be decisive, to neutralize threats as quickly as they arose. But this wasn't the battlefield, and recklessness would only cost me more. Emily's betrayal was one thing, but the man who had cowered in my closet? He'd stepped into my home, into my life, without hesitation. That I couldn't let go unpunished. I started with the basics. His name, Mark, and his polished appearance had been enough for me to go on. A few quiet inquiries with old contacts, some digging through professional networks, and soon I had more than I needed. He was a mid-level executive at a tech firm, married, with a clean-cut public image. To his colleagues, he was ambitious, hard-working. To his wife, I imagined he was charming, dependable. It didn't take long to find the cracks. A few late-night messages to the right people uncovered rumors of other indiscretions, office flirtations, trips that didn't seem to align with his professional schedule. I wasn't surprised. Men like Mark didn't just fall into one affair. They made a habit of it. I compiled everything carefully. Financial inconsistencies, photographs of him with Emily, even timestamps that contradicted his work logs. Every piece of evidence was another nail in his coffin, another step closer to dismantling the carefully crafted life he'd built. Simultaneously, I turned my attention to Emily. She thought she had the upper hand, that her tears and apologies could erase what she'd done. But I wasn't about to let her walk away from this unscathed. I started gathering proof of her infidelity, emails, messages, receipts from their trysts. I went through everything with surgical precision, documenting each lie, each betrayal, building an ironclad case for our divorce. By the time I was done, there would be no room for denial. It wasn't just about justice, it was about control. If Emily thought she could manipulate me into staying, into forgiving her, she was wrong. This wasn't forgiveness. This was war. The plan began to take shape. For Mark, exposure. His wife would receive an anonymous package with everything she needed to confront him. His firm would find itself on the receiving end of a tip about his misconduct. His reputation unraveling in the corporate world. For Emily, there would be no outburst, no dramatic scene. I would let the evidence speak for itself. When the papers were served, she'd know exactly how far she'd fallen, and that she had no one to blame but herself. This wasn't the revenge I dreamed of in the heat of the moment. It was colder, sharper, calculated, the kind of revenge that left no room for recovery. And when it was all done, they would both understand one thing. They had crossed the wrong man. Emily was waiting for me when I got home, her face pale but determined. She had always been good at hiding her emotions, at presenting a carefully curated version of herself. But now, there was no fire in her eyes, no strength in her posture. "Daniel," she began, her voice soft, measured. "Can we talk?" I walked past her, setting my keys on the counter without responding. Let her wait. Let her feel the silence. She followed me into the living room, her words coming in a rush. "I know I hurt you. I know I messed up. But I love you, Daniel. I do. We can get through this." I turned to face her, and the words I'd been holding back spilled out like a flood. "Love," I said, the bitterness clear in my voice. "You call this love? Sneaking around, lying to my face, bringing him into our home." She flinched, but I didn't stop. "You didn't just betray me, Emily. You betrayed everything we built, everything we were. And for what? Him." Her composure cracked, tears filling her eyes. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I was lonely. You were always gone. And I felt like I was losing you." I laughed cold and sharp. "So what? You found someone else to fill the void? Someone who made you feel wanted? Don't you dare blame this on me." She reached for me, but I stepped back. Her tears, her desperation. None of it moved me. I could see it for what it was. An attempt to regain control, to manipulate me into staying. "You were supposed to be strong," I said quietly, my voice heavy with the weight of everything I'd held in. "You were supposed to be the one person I could trust. But you're just weak." Her sobs broke the silence, raw and unrestrained. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. No excuses, no clever arguments, no sharp comebacks. Just silence. I walked past her, heading for the door. "It's over, Emily. I'll send the papers." The house felt impossibly small as I packed the last of my things. Each room was filled with memories, echoes of laughter, quiet conversations, shared dreams. And now they were all tainted. I didn't look back as I closed the door behind me for the last time. The road stretched out before me, empty and quiet. I drove aimlessly at first, the hum of the engine the only sound in the stillness. My mind replayed everything. The way she'd smiled at me that morning before I left, the faint smell of cologne in the house, the fear in her lover's eyes. It didn't make sense, not really. How someone so strong, so unyielding, could crumble so completely. How love and betrayal could exist in the same space, tangled together like barbed wire. I thought I knew her. I thought we were unbreakable. But trust, once shattered, could never be rebuilt. As the miles stretched on, the weight of it all began to lift. Not entirely, but enough. Enough for me to start seeing the road ahead, the possibility of something new. I wasn't the same man I had been when I met her, or even when I first opened that closet door. She'd left her mark on me. A scar that would never fully heal. But scars meant survival. They meant you'd been hurt, yes, but that you'd also lived through it. The past was behind me now, heavy but distant. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I was ready to move forward.